There are several reasons why you might want to change the size of your disc brake rotors, so I'm going to quickly explain what they are, and then I'm going to tell you how to do the job properly. Oh, and if you enjoy maintenance videos like this, don't forget to subscribe, because it really helps us out. Let's do this. So first things first, why would you change your rotor size? Well, having a larger size rotor allows for greater stopping power and more heat dissipation. This is ideal if you're a heavier rider, perhaps you're going to load your bike up with luggage, or you're going to tackle some blisteringly fast descents. You could reduce the size of your disc brake rotor, perhaps from 160mm down to 140 if you are a lighter rider, perhaps under 70 kilograms, or you're going to ride on the flat, or you just don't plan on going down any crazy descents. The UCI currently suggests a 160mm rotor on the front and a 140mm rotor on the rear as the kind of standard that most teams use. And the reason for that is because, just like cars, most of the braking is done using the front brake, and the rear brake doesn't serve as much purpose. Therefore, it can be a little bit smaller, less effective, and lighter. However, if you don't plan on loading your bike up with luggage, or you're a lighter rider, or don't plan on riding down some crazy fast descents and mostly going to ride on the flat, you could consider using a 140mm rotor on the rear and on the front. So let's get to why you might want to change them and how to do it. Disc brake rotors in almost all cases are center locked, just like this one here, and held in place with a central locking ring. There are also rotors that are held in place with bolts, which use a Torx fitting to hold them in place. These tend to be either 5 or 6 bolt. However, 6 bolt is a bit more of a mountain bike standard. It's typically common to see most road, gravel bikes and cyclocross bikes use center lock rotors, and they're held in place, tightened down to a correct torque setting. The lock ring is removed using a tool such as this. This one is the Park Tools BBT-69.2. Once you have that lock ring removed, you can carefully remove your rotor like this, and you'll see there's interlocking splines on the hub and the inner surface of this disc brake rotor, which hold the rotor in place and allow the force to transfer from the brake rotor to the wheel. The lock ring has a normal thread on it, so that means you turn it anti-clockwise like this to remove it out of the way. And then when it comes to removing the existing rotor, you can either wear some latex gloves because you don't want to get any oil from your skin onto this braking surface, or you carefully get hold of it through the center part like this. That way you can remove it and tuck it to the side nice and safely. To install your new rotor, you simply reverse the process. So don't touch the outer braking surface, place it onto your hub, lining the splines up, like so, no need for any grease. Then you can take your lock ring using the normal thread, so turning it clockwise to thread it in place. Then most of this can be done by hand until that's tight enough that you can then use the tool and your torque wrench to tighten it correctly to that 40 Newton meters, or the correct torque setting that your lock ring has written on it. Typically, road, gravel and cyclocross bikes will use either a 140mm rotor or a 160, but you can get 180mm and even whopping big 203mm rotors, although they're generally reserved for mountain biking, so probably not going to need those. That's the easy part done. Now, when you do change the rotor sizes, depending on whether you've got an upper size or downer size, and whether it's front or rear, you are going to have to reposition the calipers on your bike. Now, the process that we're going to talk through is relevant to flat mount calipers. Now, if your bike uses a different system, then this process isn't going to be relevant for you, and you need to look up with the manufacturer of your brakes how to do that. So first things we're going to talk through will be changing down from a 160mm rotor down to 140mm. Now, you do need to be careful here, because if you go down a rotor size, you will be able to fit it into your bike, and initially it will feel as if the brakes are working, but only a small section of the pad is going to be contacting that rotor braking surface, leading to very inefficient working brakes. So let me discuss on the front of the bike what we're going to need to do next. The caliper is secured to the bike through the means of this bracket here. Caliper's bolted to the bracket, and then the bracket is bolted onto the fork. Now, in the instance of this SRAM brake, like I'm using here, and also on the Shimano brakes, we simply need to remove the caliper and the bracket from the fork, undo the bolts securing the bracket to the caliper, and then flip that bracket over 180 degrees. Now, you'll see on the side of this bracket here, we've got written in text in white 140mm up, and at the top 160mm up, to indicate which way round the bracket needs to go relevant to the size of rotor you're using. Pretty simple, eh? To remove this caliper, you need to use a T25 Torx piece, and on a Shimano system, it's likely that you're going to need to use a 4 or 5mm hex key. With the caliper removed from the fork, you can see the bracket that I was referring to. And to undo it, you can see these 2 Torx bolts here. So we can simply undo those, flip the bracket 180 degrees so that the text facing upwards is relevant to the size of rotor you're using. Put the bolts back in, torque them up correctly to the manufacturer's recommended setting. Then we can mount the caliper and the bracket back in place onto our fork. When we do so, we don't need to do the bolts all the way up tightly because we then need to refit the wheel to centralize the caliper again so we haven't got any rubbing brakes. With the caliper back in place on the fork, we can refit our wheel. With the wheel securely in place, our next job is to centralize the brake caliper so that we don't have any rubbing discs. Because I mean, come on, how annoying is a rubbing brake when you're out riding with your friends? To centralize the caliper, because we've left those caliper bolts slightly loose, we can apply our front brake, and then that is going to centralize the caliper. We can take our Torx key and then gradually and evenly tighten the upper and lower bolt whilst holding the front brake on. And then tighten up those bolts to the correct torque setting as specified by the manufacturer of your bike. If you're happy with the job you've done on the front brake and the brake isn't rubbing when the wheel's spinning, happy days. Now, if you didn't listen to me at the start of this video and you did touch the braking surface on your rotor with your bare hands, easy step to try and fix that is just to spray some disc brake cleaner on that and wipe it with a clean cloth. If you haven't got any disc brake cleaner, you could just use isopropyl alcohol and that'll get that nice and clean. Now, when it comes to the rear of your bike, it's pretty much the same principle, but there is a very slight difference. You see on the side here, we've got this small bracket similar to what we have on our front caliper. However, this is fitted with a 160mm rotor. So if we want to change this down to a 140, all we have to do is remove this bracket out of the equation and bolt our caliper directly onto the flat mount surface of the frame. This principle is going to apply the same on SRAM brakes such as this, and also on Shimano ones. Then do everything back up to its specified torque setting once you've held that brake and centralized the caliper. Final check. Make sure your brake isn't rubbing, then happy days. Hope you enjoyed this maintenance video. If you have, please do give it a big thumbs up and let me know in the comments section down below what size rotor is your preferred choice, 160 or 140. Right, that's it from me. If you want to see more maintenance videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. See you later.